Now, the first person that we're going to have today is George Wurtzel. Some of you may not know him. He is a local, he had a store here in town. He is very well known among woodworkers. And in case you don't know, he's totally blind. And you wonder, how the hell does he do it? He's going to tell you. Okay, now, George used to, when he was here, he used to come to our northern woods, and I'd walk around with him, and he'd name all the woods on all of the different projects that were out on the floor, and I didn't even know what the hell they were. He did. Okay, he does, he builds designed furniture, and as a matter of fact, he designed one of the pieces of furniture that he designed sold over 1 million pieces. He does architectural woodworking, and he's also done a lot of art woodworking. And he is now remodeling a store down in Tennessee, and he's going to have a store down there as soon as it's all done. Now, he also, some of you may go back a long ways, he used to be a star in a Subaru automotive advertisement. So, maybe he'll tell you about that too. So, at any rate, here he is, George Wurtzel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for coming to, I ordered this day on the internet. You know, you can just go get weather on the internet, you know, so we plugged in and have a nice day. So, everybody who's been up here, you know, the other people who've been up here, try to give you some wisdom that you can use and take home with you, and they do demos and those kinds of things. But I'm verbally going to give you some wisdom that everybody can use. Everybody always wonders if their chop saw is making a square cut. And so in 5 easy steps, you can figure out how perfect your chop saw cuts. And take a block of wood, you know, roughly 6 inches, 5.5, you can take 5.5, 6 inches, doesn't matter the size, as long as it fits on your chop saw. Make a cut. If you're on the left-hand side of the blade, rotate the piece of wood and put the fresh cut piece against the fence, make a cut, rotate the piece, make a cut, rotate the piece, make a cut, make 5 cuts. The 5th cut that you take the off valve that comes off the outside edge, take a piece of calipers and measure it at each end. If it's the same at both ends, your chop saw is cutting perfectly square. If it isn't, if you look at the thick side, if it's towards you, the saw has to go, I think that's right, to the left. If the thin side is towards you, it depends on which side you put your block in as you cut them, as long as you keep them on the same side. So, but you won't have any trouble figuring out which way to turn it, you know, to adjust and you can do the same thing with a crosscut guide on a table saw. Just make 5 cuts and then measure the little off-fall piece that you have at the outside edge, and it'll tell you if your table saw's. So that's all the woodworking wisdom I have to give out today, and it was worth exactly what you paid for it. So I started off a long time ago in my mom's womb, and my mom, I've been told that my eye disease is caused from bad genes, and so my mom always used to wear hand-me-down patch Sears and Roebuck jeans most of the time, and I convinced my mother after I became a little bit older and a little bit smarter that if she'd wore Calvin Klein jeans, a better gene, that I wouldn't have this eye problem that I have today. It's a degenerative eye disease. I started off in life as a kid with a little tiny bit of vision, and by the time I was 20 years old or so, 99% of the vision that I had was gone. So I've spent my whole adult life so far as a blind person. I've spent 50 years in the woodworking business, roughly. I've done a little bit of everything. Architectural, millwork, bar, restaurant, stores, bank fixtures, color lines, storefronts. Spent some time in the Corian business. There's a guy over here in Plato, Minnesota, named Tom Penske, owns the Penske Edge, and he's the king of solid surface fabricating and making tools for the business, and took one of his classes once upon a time. As a matter of fact, he just stopped at my shop last week down in Tennessee to say hi, and spent a little time talking about the old days in the solid surface business. And I spent some time in North Carolina working in the furniture business. I designed a triangular shaped wooden box for veterans and tournament flags, and was smart enough at the time to get a design patent on it, and that product sold over 1 million units. It's my big claim to fame in the furniture business. It's just a simple little triangular shaped box, but they sold a lot of them because sadly there was a lot of people involved in World War II and Korea who passed away in the last 30 years. So I spent quite a bit of time teaching. I originally ended up in Minneapolis because I was the industrial arts teacher for Blind Incorporated, which is located up in the old Pillsbury Mansion up at about 21st and 1st, or 21st and Nicollet, I guess. And it was most of the people that we got at Blind Incorporated were people who became blinded later in life for one reason or another, through disease, through diabetes, through injuries, through going to war or different things. And so my job as an industrial arts teacher was to show people that it wasn't necessarily their lack of vision that limited how they did things and how they ran woodworking equipment, but it was just a case of knowledge and learning the proper techniques and tools that you need to make those happen. One of my big things that I really, really work hard at doing and trying to promote is when I talk to groups like this and want you to take home with you and to give to your friends, and that when you find yourselves maybe in my age bracket or a little less or a little more, and you have retinal degeneration diseases, lots of times people think that they need to give up their woodworking and what they do. And what I like to tell them that is, if you come talk to me, I can show you how to be a blind person. I cannot teach you to be a woodworker. And that's a lot more work than teaching you how to exist in the world as a blind person. But I can teach you how to safely continue to do what you do in your shop and love to do. I can teach you how to measure it as accurately and maybe more accurately than you can with your eyes. Anybody who was here this morning for George's presentation on doing his all his router setup work using gauge blocks or bars, you saw that his whole emphasis was use your fingers to try to figure out how close they are. You can easily feel with your fingers the thickness of a human hair. You lay a human hair down on a table or something and try to see it and see how hard it is to find that human hair. You run your hand across that table or that piece of glass or whatever, you instantly find the human hair. If you happen to get it in your hamburger, you really notice the thickness of the human hair. And so if you really want to know how accurate something, rub it against your lip right here, because this is really, really sensitive, and you can really tell the difference between thicknesses of things. So I brought one of the only tools that I use differently than you use to measure. Anybody who's seen any of the YouTube videos that are out there about me, lots of times you see these in them. It's called a click rule. The Highland Hardware in Atlanta, Georgia sells them now. It's an incredibly simple thing. It's a threaded rod, 16 threads to the inch. On this side of the threaded rod, they left every eighth thread so you could feel it. So anybody who knows a little bit about rulers know that if they left the eighth thread and it's 16 threads to the inch, that's the half-inch mark. So it's called a click rule because it makes a little clicking sound. So there's a spring-loaded detent ball bearing behind this little block right here. If you want to know 1 1/4 inch, okay, so this first one is a 1/2 inch. The second one is the 1 inch mark. Then you go 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 1/4. So now the distance from here to here is 1/4 inch. You put this edge against the inside edge of your saw blade and this edge against the fence. You slide your fence over until it touches it. Bang! You've got 1 1/4 inch. If you want to measure the thickness of a tabletop, you set this down. You pick it back up, and you say, "Okay, there's a 1/2 inch. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. By golly, the thickness of that top was 3/4 inch thick because it took 4 clicks to get to the 1 inch mark." If you want to measure to cut the last piece of wood that fits in at the top of your cabinet, you put this against one side, you bring this over, line it up against the inside. You don't even read it. You take this over to your table saw, you put that against the fence, you put that against the end of your piece of wood and make the cut. So you don't even you don't have to even figure out what the measurement is. So it can be, and is as efficient as, you know, a standard tape measure can be. People who use rigid rulers, they don't have to fight with the little thing that's at the end of the ruler that moves back and forth that gives you fits. But this device here is 1 foot long, so now I've threaded an extra foot on the end of my click rule. So now when I measure with this device, anything from here to this point here is exactly a foot. Out to here is exactly 18 inches. This distance from this plate to this plate is 6 inches. So now I got 0 to 2 feet in the same in the same device. So it does take a little bit of thinking about what you want. If I want, you know, 19 inches, okay, I'm at 18. You can't go any further. So you come back down here. You set your ruler at 1 inch. So now I got 12 and 1 inch there, and then the 6 inches there makes 19. So, and you can put, anybody who's used a folding ruler knows they're really pretty easy and wonderful to use up until you get to be about 6 feet long, then they become unruly. Same as true these. Once you have about 6 extension, 5 extension on this, it becomes pretty unmanageable. But there's other ways to get around those bigger measurements. As for myself, I started off, like I said, in the business of architectural millwork and bar and restaurant fixtures and those kinds of things, and corian and kitchen cabinet business and everything. All things that took multiple people. One point in time they had 15 employees. All things that took big trucks, all things that took bigger pieces of equipment. I have changed my standards in life a little bit, so now I've started doing a lot of turned objects. So bottle stoppers, ice cream scoops, which I have one of sitting up here too. That's not a scoop, there's a scoop. An ice cream scoop that doubles as a lethal weapon. So if you have an intruder, which you may get when you get ice cream out into your house, it happens often, I tell you, you get the ice cream out, all of a sudden people are sneaking in the back door wanting ice cream. My golly, you take them out with this, and it's made to do it. The thing that about a little less than a year ago, between Christmas and New Year's last year, Sharon and I have a little gallery in our building down in Tennessee, and nobody was coming in because of COVID. I mean, we haven't seen a person in our shop in like 3 months, you know, and so we're just sitting around trying to figure out what to do. And Sharon says, I have this old wooden biscuit cutter that my friend Irene gave me a couple years ago, who was an antique dealer forever and ever and ever. And when she passed away, she was in her 90s, and that was 30 years ago. So we don't really know how old this old wooden biscuit cutter was, but we're thinking at least, you know, 60, 80, 90 years old or whatever. So she says, can you make one of these? So she hands it to me, and I go downstairs and dig around in the shop until I find a piece of wood that's big enough to make them, and I make a biscuit cutter and bring it upstairs and show it to her. She says, oh my God, those are beautiful. She says, I didn't think that you could get the edges here so thin. She said, I thought that had to be done by a machine. I said, well, I am a machine. I don't have a problem doing that. So we started making these just before Christmas last year. We put some up on our Facebook page. I still have a leftover Facebook page called George the Subaru Guy from when I did the Subaru ad back 2.5 years ago. And people all of a sudden say, oh, I want one. And before we knew it, we had like 30 of them sold. And then some nice person took and put our picture of our 30 biscuit cutters up on the White Lily flour page. And White Lily flour is the flour of the South for making biscuits out of. I mean, it's everybody is, you know, south of the Mason-Dixon line knows about White Lily flour and making biscuits with White Lily flour. So they put it up there, and all of a sudden we had orders for 60 biscuit cutters. So we started doing them, started putting them out there, started putting them up on our Facebook pages and doing that. And now we've made over 600 of these. And, you know, I always say that, you know, you can always find a way to become a millionaire. I think I only have to live to be about 145 to become a millionaire selling these, but, you know, there's always hope. So I'm guessing by this year after Christmas, you know, we'll probably have sold, you know, 750 or more of them. And, you know, if that's the only way you can get people to give you money, that's a good way to get people to give you money. I have an old 1900s, late 1800, early 1900 building that we bought. My goal when I was 19 years old is I wanted a building big enough to have a shop in, have a place to live, and a gallery to sell out of. And so when I was teaching out in California and a fire came along and burned down a bunch of buildings on the property I worked on, and so my job changed, and so I said, when I move, I'm going to go find what I wanted when I was 19 years old. And Sharon and I spent about 6 weeks traveling around down south, looking at all the little towns, looking for all the rundown, just about ready to fall over buildings that would fit our criteria. You know, big enough to live in, big enough to have a shop in, big enough to have a gallery in, and walkable. Had to be in a place where I could walk to wherever I wanted to go in the city where I was. 'Cause I don't drive so good, and at least I drive really good. It's just that other people don't appreciate how I drive. So we looked all over. We made offers on building. We made offers on a building in Johnson City, Tennessee, just because we both love folk music, and there's a lot of folk music there. And the sign said that it was the lady was motivated seller. She was motivated to get to the most money she could possibly get for her building. She wasn't motivated to sell it. So we started looking around, and Sharon's looking at a real map, one of those things, you know, that you unfold, that, you know, that you can never fold back. And she says, well, here's a town that has pretty good sized letters, right, you know, Greenville on it. So we went over to Greenville and checked it out, and lo and behold, we're driving around, and here's a building with a couple different buildings in town we looked at, and we found one, called the realtor, and went in and took a look at it, and there's just a couple things along with it. The roof leaked, there wasn't any power, there wasn't any heat, most of the windows were gone. But besides that, it was a really nice building. Just needed a few things to make it better. So we started in at it, fixed the roof first, and then Jim Jacobs and Lee Turtelot, both from here in Minneapolis, belong to the Minnesota Woodturners Club with me when I was here. They came down one weekend and spent 3 or 4 days with me and built a new bathroom in my building so I could move in. Once I had a bathroom, then it was the spot to move in. The first winter I lived there, you could get up in the morning sometimes on cold mornings and find ice in the kitchen sink, but that we've rectified that now. We don't have ice in our kitchen sink anymore. We have heat in the building now, and now we're starting to do some larger improvements to it. We're putting in a big master bath and bedroom next, and then we're putting a new entrance on the front of the building that will go into the gallery that we're putting together there. Right now we're running a gallery that's about 11 feet by 15 feet. When we're done, we're going to have a 1,600 foot gallery there for people to sell my stuff and other people's stuff out of there as well. So that's me in a nutshell and what I do. And then if you have questions, that's what I'm really hoping that you know, how can I help you with your woodworking? How can I, if you have a friend who, you know, who is struggling with seeing well, I'm always willing to help people out with that, you know, to let people continue to do what they love to do. And if you raise your hand, Sam will have to answer your questions.
One gentleman back here. What do you use to sharpen your lathe tools?
Tormac grinder. I myself don't have a problem whatsoever using a high-speed grinder whatsoever, but I find in teaching it's really nice. The Tormac is great because people can actually put their fingers right down there where the blade is going to hit the grinding wheel. It's water cooled, it turns real slow RPM, and it turns away from the tool, so you can't get your finger pinched between the edge of the tool and the grinding wheel, which will take a chunk out of you really, really quick. I don't know, probably none of you have ever experienced that probably before, but I have one, so. Go ahead.
Yeah, could you tell us more about the puzzle furniture? Just fascinating.
So, when I was here in Minneapolis, Sam can attest to this. Sam worked for me for a while when I was here in town, and I came up with a crazy idea. I had a wooden puzzle that in my head that my grandfather made when I was a little kid. It's one of those little, there's like 17 pieces in it. It's got 9 pieces in the center, and then the pieces slide in and they go inside of 2 frames that are made up of 4 pieces each. And my
Overlapped and twist.
and they all go together, and they all have a bunch of them have a dado in them, so they all lock together. My grandfather used to make them when I was a kid, and I said, I want to make those again. So I have 40 cousins, So I start calling my cousins and say, do you have one of Grandpa's puzzles? Do you have one of Grandpa's puzzles? Nobody had one. So I decided that I was going to recreate Grandpa's puzzle. So I have a bunch of 3/4 by 3/4 stock, and I start putting dados in it and cutting it up and everything. In my mind, when I looked at this puzzle, I always thought it was a rectangle. And lo and behold, it is a perfect cube. Every piece that's in the puzzle is exactly the same length. But there's a dado in from the end of the piece. It's 3/4 inch stock, so then the dado is in 3/4 of an inch. So I fussed with it until I got it to finally work. And then I had a 5-gallon bucket of all these parts and pieces from all the tries that I had made to make it work. So I'm sitting out behind my building at the picnic table, sipping on an adult beverage and playing with all these parts that I have in this bucket and saying, I can build furniture based on this exact same design. And then I get thinking about different people and different designers in the world that I like and everything. And Buckminster Fuller kind of came to mind. And Buckminster Fuller, he had a term that was called intendus, which means that when you build a self-supporting structure of any sort, all the forces should be pushed to the outside of the frame, as in geodesic domes and different things. So in my tables, all of the force is pushed to the outside of the they're all lap joints or bridle joints, I guess, depending on your perspective, all put together on all the corners and everything. Then the last vital piece that goes into the puzzle pushes against 2 pieces, which pushes against 2 pieces, which pushes against 2 pieces, which pushes against 2 pieces. So they're totally self-supporting. And there's a wing nut on the bottom that puts tension on the center column, and once the tension is on the center column, you can stand on it. And you can take them apart and put them in a pizza box and move to your new location. And there's pictures of them in the book up here? Okay.
They're also on your website, George.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of pictures at gmwurtzel.com.
Are you still making cables, George?
I haven't made any in a little while, but I have a bunch of them in my showroom down in North Carolina, and have intention to build more.
Okay.
I have more glass.
George,
Yes.
I think the group would be interested in knowing some of your other exploits.
I've done a few other things. My friend
Like
here, Lee
the,
Turdall, for Oak Points. I've done a few other things. I was on the U.S. Paralympic team.
Yes.
We just had the Paralympics that just ended up, and the men's goalball team took a bronze. No, didn't even get a bronze. But the women's goalball team, American women's goalball team, got a silver medal. But I was on the U.S. Paralympic team. I was cross-country skier. Went to Yala, Norway back in 1980, and competed for the U.S. and finished 19th, 1.8 seconds off the leader. Now, how you can get that many people? They didn't intend for there to be as many people bunched up at the end of the race as and it just wasn't wide enough. You couldn't pass at the end of the race. So if you weren't in first, 3 miles before the race finished, you weren't going to get in first place. And that's basically what it boiled down to. But 1.8 seconds off the leader. And then all of us here are familiar with the Berkey Minor over in Wisconsin. So anybody who's ever skied that race or done that race very much knows that if you ever finish in the top 1,000, you always get to start in the first tier. At least that's the way it used to be. I don't know if it still is or not. But back in the late 70s, I skied that race a couple times, and one year I managed to finish 997th, so I made it into the top tier of 1,000.
Whoa, I never did.
You know, we started in the very front of the third tier, so you had to pass 1,000 people to get up, and I. We were skiing down this pretty good slope, and some guy in front of it falls over, and I just ski right over top of him. He screams at me like something, "Are you effing blind?" or something real close to that. And we just kept right on going. And, I didn't want to take up that conversation right at that point in time. So I'm kind of a distinct-looking big guy, and at that point, I was probably the only person ever skied the Birkebeiner in a Stetson cowboy hat. And so we're sitting in here again drinking adult beverages in the lodge, and my buddy who I ski with all the time, Ray, he says, "Oh my gosh," he says, "here's a guy coming right straight at us, looking really mad," and he comes right up, he gets right in my face. He says, "You ran me over on the trail," and I said, "Well, you were just laying there." And he goes, "Didn't you see me?" And I hold up my cane, and he says, "Nope." I did not see you laying in the middle of the trail. I'm really sorry, but you learn to be a better skier, you wouldn't be laying in the middle of the trail. So in my other skiing exploits, Sons of Norway, which everybody here in town is somewhat familiar with, being as though they just sold their gorgeous, beautiful building down there on Lake Street and tore it down and put condominiums up. That building was stunning. Sons of Norway sponsored a little ski trip that I was involved with myself and Concordia College up in Moorhead, and we went over to Northern Europe, and we started off on the Kola Peninsula in Russia, and we skied all the way across Norway, Finland, Sweden, in the area that's called Lapland, and that was a little over 500 miles, 40 some days out on the trail, 45 days, something like that. Pulled over gear and folks. And had a wonderful time. I mean, balmy weather, 57 below one night. I mean, it was just beautiful. Actually had to put a sweater on that day. And then when I lived in North Carolina for the first time, down back in the 80s and 90s, I got involved in raising and breaking horses, and used to ride endurance rides, 50-mile rides, 100-mile rides. I've done all of the dumb things that people can do to get rid of money. I had sailboats when I was a kid, I had horses, and I had a drag car when I was a kid. So all the ways you can easily get rid of money. And then I'm in the woodworking business. What can I say? Get rich quick schemes are just in my blood.
So, to turn with your eyes closed, you must always have your hand on the...
Not always, but if you turn a lot, you know that you really can set your finger up there on top, And it just as you watch, when you take a really nice sharp tool and you run it, down whatever you're doing, if it's a bowl or a spindle or whatever it is, you watch that little line as your tool goes along, You can run your finger right up there on top and watch that line the same way. When I'm teaching other people to turn, I'll stand on the back side of the lathe and I'll just run my finger along the top of the pieces they're cutting so I can see where they're cutting and how they're cutting. And a lot of it's listening. If you've turned very much, you know when things are turning good. You know when you're getting those nice, pretty long shavings coming up off the piece. And I talk to people, about running a table saw. When you walk up to a table saw, and if you really, really set your mind to it and think about it, table saws are static. You have a spinning blade. That blade isn't going anywhere within a circle. It can't go anywhere. It's totally fixed there. The only things that moves is your hands. So before you make your cut, before you turn the table saw on, if you look at the distance, between the fence and the saw blade, and if it's narrower than what your thumb is, it won't fit through there without leaving a piece of your thumb behind. So, you decide as an individual, what am I comfortable with? If there's 1.5 inches between the blade and the saw and the fence, am I comfortable running my thumb through on 1.5 inch piece? I am perfectly comfortable with that. But if it gets any thinner than that, I'm going to use a push stick, and any sensible person should. So, and I'm like everybody else. Stand to the side. Don't stand right behind that blade. Those things will come back and visit you. If you're running a joiner, I mean, your hands are the moving parts. If you're running a relatively small piece and you're feeling uncomfortable, put a good push stick up there on top that sits flat on top, where you got a big handle and it's got a little lip on the back that pushes that piece through there. Keep yourself safe. If you a planer, unless you're really determined or you forgot to take your necktie off, you're relatively safe running a planer. I mean, as the piece goes in, you certainly feel the edge of the table as your board approaches what it is. So you release it, and most of the time you release it anyways. The machine does all the work. Bandsaw, if I have my choice and I can get someone else to cut something out on the bandsaw for me, I will. It has nothing to do with me feeling uncomfortable about using it. It's just that I'm not efficient at it. I have a pretty little guide that goes on the front of my bandsaw. It's just a little tiny pin that sits, it's really just a rat tail file, and it's the point of the handle of the file that points down, that's just taped to the front of my bandsaw, to the guard. And if I put a pattern or scribe a line into whatever I want to cut, I can follow that pretty good. You learn to compensate for the fact that guide that you're using is 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch ahead of your blade. So as the piece goes by it, you have to start making your turns after it has already left your point of reference. But after you do it a little while, you get relatively good. Can I make absolutely perfect cuts following the line? No. But I can get it close enough that I can certainly get it with a spindle sander.
George, I've got another thing I think you should mention. Tell the story about how you got your workshop in Minneapolis in Mickey's shop, and how it wasn't wired for your types of tools. I think that's quite interesting.
I've been in the woodworking business and owned my own shops forever and ever. So when I moved into the building where I was there in Minneapolis, it didn't have 3-phase power. So bought a phase converter and then proceeded to run all the wires and pull all the wires, and I just don't tell colors very good. I know which ones to put there. I know if you need 4 wires, you need a green one, you need a blue one, you need a red one and a black one if you want 3-phase power to run. And as long as you put the wires on the rolls of wire that you own on a piece of conduit and put them in alphabetical order, you always know which ones are which. I mean, it's simple things. I mean that you just have to put together to make how I do what I do work.
George's landlord, Mickey, said, I can't afford to rewire the shop. And George said, well, all my tools are 3-phase rated. They're European?
No, they're just all 3-phase power.
Yeah. And so Mickey says, well, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. George says, well, I can rewire the whole shop for you if you'll just tell me what color the wires are so I can make the proper connections. And he did that. And that's how he came to Minneapolis and set up his shop.
So my shop down in Tennessee, where I am now, same thing. There was no power at all in the part of the bit. Well, no, the power that was on the side of the building where my shop is now was all ran off of a 1920s fuse box that they wouldn't let me turn back on. I don't know why. It looked like it had a little toaster fire down in the one corner, but besides that, it must have been good. But anyway, so I've ran all the new conduit and everything for that building whatsoever, and have acquired a very good friend down there who's a retired electrician. And I run all the conduit and everything, pull all the wires, mount all the conduit, and he comes in and then wires up all the pretty colors. So he does all the Christmas work for me. Gets the greens where they belong and the reds where they belong. There's a book up here that has some photos in it if you want to come up and take a look at different things that I've done. I've been fortunate enough to do some art shows around the country. I did a art show at the Detroit Museum of Contemporary Art back probably almost 10 years ago now. I did the best art show I've ever done in my whole life at the Pacific Design Center in LA. And that was a wonderful experience. Done an art show up in DC, Washington DC. Did some art shows here in town with artists and storefronts. In the around the Black Forest Inn, there was a project back 10 years ago with about 10? Yeah, that's where I met Sam. Sam was doing works for artists and storefronts, and we were doing different things in the neighborhood where we would take abandoned storefronts and fix them up, wash all the windows, put a backdrop in, put some lighting in, put some artists in them. And Joan Borgerbruggen was the head of that. Then she moved downtown and started working with the Hennepin Theater Trust. And now they do the Made Here things downtown and all the storefronts and everything. I did the very first one of those that they ever did as well, downtown. And I don't consider myself to be an artist. I consider myself to be a really good craftsperson with a lot of experience. I always tell people, you come to my shop, you want to build something, and we can take your hands and my knowledge, or we can take, your knowledge in my hands, and we can build whatever it is. That's all I got.
George, I got a question. So I don't know, it was 5 to 10 years ago, you were at Northrop King and I bought a bird's eye maple plate from you.
Uh-huh.
And we talked for a little bit, and you were by yourself and I was by myself, and I paid you for it. How do you tell the difference between...
Are you the guy that shorted me $10?
No, it was 20.
Oh, okay.
How do you tell the difference between the bills?
You can't.
You can't.
But nowadays, all you do is just pull out your trusty iPhone and put it in front of your iPhone, and it'll tell you what the number is.
Oh, nice.
Just like that. There's an app for that. When I was young and foolish and had an unruly sense of humor, my brother ran a vending location in Detroit, and I used to be the teller every once in a while, and people would come through and say what cup of coffee, candy bars, blah blah blah. You'd add it up, tell them how much they owed and everything, and people would give you a bill, give you a bill, and you take it from them, and you say, what is this bill, to whoever else is next in line. And you instantly, people who hadn't been there before understood how the process worked. So unless you were in cahoots with the next two people in line, it was pretty sure that someone was going to say what bill it is. You never said, is this a $10 bill? Because people are what people are. They'll say, oh yeah, so you say, what is this bill? And so this gentleman, he hands me this bill, and he's real worth. So what's the bill? He did 20. And I hold up the bill, and someone says, what is this bill? And someone says 1. And I just went, and I said, next. And the young lady says, I got a 5. I just adjusted his attitude. I had a different sense of humor than I have now.
Tell everybody about that Subaru commercial. I thought that was a very, very nice commercial, and it probably has a good story behind it.
Sharon has really never liked my beard real well, and that's a story all into itself. I wanted stereotypical things that people get in their head, what people think of people and say about people. When I in the woodworking business and everything, I didn't want to be say, oh, the blind guy woodworker. So I was trying to figure out what I could do to create, a persona that was me, that said more about who I was than my blindness did. So I decided to start wearing bib overalls and shaggy long hair and a shaggy beard a long time ago, And Sharon actually has a picture in the book here. She says where I used to look nice. And so the Subaru people, you know, they put out a call to all of the agencies and everything, and the call said that they were looking for, you know, someone who was 55 to 75 years old, somewhat rustic and a little bit curmudgeonly, and blind. Yeah, and I guess that was the important part, is I'm blind. And so I didn't have an agent. I don't know why. I was already living in California. I should have known you go to California, you got to have an agent. But I didn't know that when I got there. But anyways, so they put out the call, and 5 different people gave them my name and said, this is the guy you need for the ad. And they called me. So I right out of the blue, you know, called me. I'm not afraid to hang up on the guy the first time he ever called me. Like, what? Yeah, right, buddy. You want me to do an ad or whatever. And I let them at least talk long enough to say, people have recommended you for this. So they it used to be you have to, you know, go somewhere, do a hotel or something, and they'll set up, you know, castings, you know, and you do your little dog and pony show at a hotel somewhere, and then you go away. Now they do it all over FaceTime. They call you up and they say, look right, look left, you know, they send you the lines ahead of time, read your lines. And so we did the FaceTime call and everything, and the guy said, thank you very much, appreciate your time, and we're done, bye. And I was sitting there for a second, I hadn't quite hung up yet, and I heard one guy way in the back, just barely hear him say, that's our guy. And I thought, I think I got a job. And if you ever have a chance to do a national ad of some sort, do it. It pays really, really, really good. The nice thing about that particular, life expectancy of a car ad's about 90 days, is what the agency told me that did it. And that ad ran for 18 months. So the one young lady who's in the ad, she says it's the highest grossing television ad for her that she's ever done. And I asked her one day, I says, you know, Carrie, I says, how often do you go somewhere? And someone says, oh, I saw you, you know, on an ad on TV. I'm sure I did. She goes, almost never. She says, you know, and she says, up to the point in time when I, you know, did your ad, she says, my best-selling ad was a tampon ad. So she says, how many people are going to come up and ask you if you were the first? So, you know, but when I first moved to Greenville, Tennessee, the ad was still running, and it ran for March Madness down there. I mean, anybody who's been in the South during basketball season for March Madness knows it's insanity. If you own a manufacturing plant of some sort, you might as well just close down the last week of March Madness, because people are just going to come to work. They're going to watch the basketball game. So it ran the last week of March Madness. So I could not walk down the street in little Greenville, Tennessee, and people come up to me and say, can I take my picture with you? You know, it was great. And people still remember that ad. It baffles me. If you would have told me before I did it that you could do a single television ad on TV and go anywhere in the country, and people will come up to you and say, were you in this ad? I would have told you were absolutely crazy. No one pays any attention to television ads. I was wrong. What can I say? I got paid for being wrong even.
Yesterday we were in a tiny bakery.
Oh, yeah. Way up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in this little teeny tiny town just outside of Bessemer. I can't remember the name of the town. And we were in, I called it Rattle Bakery, but you said it's Randall's Bakery. Sometimes my phone doesn't pronounce things correctly. So we're in this bakery buying some incredible baked goods, and I hear these 2 guys over in the corner talking, and the guy says, I know that guy from something. He's got to be, you know, in movies or something. I mean, it was funny. And it was 2 years ago the ad ran, and this guy's over in the corner saying, I know I've seen that guy. You know, we've never been there before ever.
I might also mention that when George lived in Minneapolis, and he would be driving somewhere in my car, I'd be driving, and George would be sitting there, and he'd say, Lee, I think you just missed your turn. And I said, wow, gosh, you're right, I did. But how did you know that? He said, well, we passed under a bridge, and I know your exit is right under the bridge, and I felt an air pressure change as we went under the bridge. So I thought you probably missed your turn. And Jim and I, when we were visiting George in Tennessee, with helping with the new building, we had to go get a lot of materials from the building centers. And we didn't know our way around town, but George, he memorized the streets. And he'd say, you go down 2 blocks, and take a right, and then we'll go straight, and then I'll tell you from there. And it was amazing, wasn't it, Jim?
Yeah, we got around just fine.
We got around, but we didn't know the town, but George did. He has a way of memorizing, visualizing maps in his head.
So we were driving across the UP, coming here this last week, and every once in a while, you know, say, well, how far is this from here to there, from there to here, or whatever? And I don't know. I got to be sent back for recalibrating. I've been 2 miles off like 10 times in a row. Just 2. You know, it's. Well, yeah, we're like 1,000 miles from home right now. It was 998. You know, we were getting ready to come to Minneapolis, and I says it should be we're, what, 200 miles, and it was like 198 or something. That's 2 miles off like 3 or 4 times in a row. I don't know where to get recalibrated either. That's the real problem. My mom has passed away. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks for coming out to the show.
Thank you. Give me a little biscuit cutter.
Support all the woodworkers that are here. Build lots of pretty things.